I'm your host, Micah Versman, and today we're digging into the fine print on this week's episode of the Producer Podcast as I sit down with Lisa Califf of the entertainment law firm Donaldson, Califf, and Perez, as well as a co-author of the book Clearance and Copyright, to talk about the legal side of filmmaking and what producers should keep in mind. So without further ado, let's get started. Thank you, Lisa, very much for coming on to the Producer Podcast today.
My pleasure. It's nice to meet you, and thanks for having me.
So I'd love to just kind of hear a little bit about yourself and what attracted you to the whole entertainment sphere of law.
Well, I'll give you a very short, but covering a long period of time history.
Okay.
I was born and raised in LA. And when you're born and raised in LA, there's the entertainment industry is sort of what everybody does. And I learned at a pretty young age that I wasn't very talented as an actor or a singer or a writer. And I did want to be in the arts. I was very good in school, and my dad was a lawyer. And so when I was a teenager, I think around 13 or 14, I was like, oh, let's be an entertainment lawyer. And then I can be around the arts. I can help people, but I can lean into what my strengths are, which are more on the academic business side.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really that moment. And then that was the trajectory. I made some detours along the way. Most notably, I worked in the music industry for a couple of years before I went to law school. Just kind of an A&R and sort of as an assistant, had a great time doing that. And then I went to law school with the goal of being an entertainment lawyer. And I stayed in Los Angeles intentionally because I wanted to live here and I wanted to practice entertainment law. And as I was in school, I took whatever entertainment law classes I could, which at that time weren't very many. Now law schools, especially in LA, have such a robust entertainment law programs. But back then it wasn't really the same. And just did what I could to get a job. And so when I got out of school, I was actually fortunate enough to work at a big firm. And I was working in the entertainment litigation department. So it wasn't really exactly what I wanted to do, but it was a great experience. So I got experience in litigation. We had really high profile clients who represented Snoop Dogg and Madonna and Axl Rose. And that was a very kind of fun, interesting department to be working in. But the time period of just before your time, I think, was like 2001. It was like huge time of financial sort of crises and a lot of white collar crime and SEC investigations. And I got kind of pulled into that department. And I spent a lot of time doing securities regulatory work and kind of white collar defense. And so that was actually very interesting. I loved working that. I loved doing that. I loved partners I worked with. It was really a great experience, but I knew that I wanted to get back to doing entertainment. And when I tried to make that transition, I was about a fourth year lawyer. It was really difficult. I was like, oh my goodness, it's just like breaking into any industry. Again, I didn't think it would be that hard. I was like, I've worked at a really big firm. I've had this big experience. I was helping people stay out of jail. Like I was doing really high stakes stuff. And the viewpoint was that I didn't have the right skill set to transfer over. And so I did a lot of interviewing, just put myself out there as much as I possibly could. Because it's just like, it's really in any industry, and people say in entertainment, it's hard to get in, right? It's hard to break in. And so I just put myself out there, looking at job applications every day, putting my resume out to lots of jobs I didn't want. And then my sister actually ran into a family friend of ours and was like, said, don't you have an entertainment lawyer? And he had like a DVD distribution business where he would buy and selling DVDs. And he said he did. And my sister said, you should introduce him to Lisa because Lisa's looking for a job. And he did. And I was like, I don't want to meet with this guy. Like, he has a small practice. He's never going to be able to hire me. This isn't going to work out. I was kind of at the end of my rope. Like anybody kind of is familiar with when you're looking for a job and can't find one, you're like, oh my God, forget it. I'll do something else. And I met with him and we had this wonderful, interesting lunch. And he was the first lawyer, because I had worked in big law, and think it's safe to say none of the lawyers were really happy with what they were doing. Like they all enjoyed certain aspects of it,
Mm-hmm.
but people were either really stressed out or they had too much work or they something, they weren't really happy, the majority of the lawyers. And I'll never forget what he said to me. And he goes, you're never going to make as much money as if you stayed at your firm. He goes, but at like doing big law, he goes, but you're going to love your job. And I was like, what? I'm like, nobody loves their job. Even all the people that I met in entertainment who represented talent or worked in studios, like, it's kind of means to an end or
Right.
some reason. And I was so surprised when he said that to me. I was like, really? And I was like, okay. And 3 weeks later, we were working together. And this was back in 2005. So I'm really dating myself. And then we became partners in 2008. He kind of taught me the ropes. So kind of falling into this area. Sorry, I'm like just chatting. I'm just
Oh,
spitting
yeah.
it all out. I'm like,
You're good. This is all interesting.
I'm like, okay, I didn't think this was going to be as long of a story, but I think it's interesting because it gets into a topic that I think is important, which is the type of entertainment lawyer or entertainment law that I do.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really understand the different types of entertainment law, and his practice was representing independent filmmakers. And at the time, it really was just filmmakers. There was no independent TV, there was no really web content. It was really independent filmmakers. And so I was like, okay, I don't know anything about this, but he took me under his wing and he trained me, and I learned about this wonderful world of independent content creating and working with fiction and nonfiction projects on the scripted side, unscripted side, and this world of clearance. And I had not been exposed to this at all. So it really was a surprise. I kind of thought I'd work in a studio or I'd represent actors and actresses. Like I didn't think that my trajectory was to be representing independent content creators. And I'm so happy that I ended up here because I think it really suits my personality. So
Mm-hmm.
so that was almost 20 years ago, and working together ever since. It was just me and him at the beginning, and now we're a group of about 16 lawyers. And
Nice.
our practice is representing independent content creators kind of in all aspects of development, production, distribution, clearance.
Mm-hmm. That's
So that was a
neat.
long answer to your
Yeah.
question.
No.
That's kind of how I got here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's neat. Just kind of, I guess, jumping off of what you were saying there about how you didn't realize this whole like independent side really existed. I feel like that's a lot of things filmmakers just in general don't realize is like what all do entertainment lawyers help with? Like for me,
Right,
the first thing that comes to mind is like, oh, the contracts with like the
right.
cast and that. But like what other things do you help with?
Yeah, and it's a really good question because even when you say contract, it's like, well, what kind of contracts? What do you
Mm-hmm.
do? And so I think for us, we, as I kind of said, is really briefly, is we represent independent content creators from beginning to the end of a project. So we can come in at the beginning when you're developing something. We can help you with you're optioning a book or you're optioning a script, you're optioning some type of material, or maybe you have a producer who's coming on board and you need a co-production agreement, or you're co-writing something, or you're just doing something in development. We can help with all of those types of agreements. We also help with financing, mostly equity financing. So I always like to say we don't act as an agent, so we don't go and find money or pitch projects, but we can do all the legal work. So if we have to create a corporate entity for you, if we have to create all the documents for your financiers or revise those, get those to the end of the line so you can actually get funding. We help with all that type of stuff, grant agreements, equity financing agreements, some loan debt agreements. We don't do too much of that, but we do some, and distribution as well. So if you're fortunate enough that you have a project, Netflix is coming in, they want to produce it with you, they're going to cover the budget, they're hiring you guys to produce the content. We can help with those types of agreements. And then during production, all of the agreements that you alluded to, like sort of you're above the line, the below the line, providing you with forms. So you're armed with public filming notices and you have materials releases. If someone gives you stuff, any appearance releases for a documentary, negotiate all your talent agreements for a scripted project. So we can do all of that type of work. And then distribution. So let's say you make something independently and it gets picked up by Sony or Apple or whomever. We can help with that negotiate that distribution agreement as well.
Okay.
So we do all of that. And then we also do clearance. So clearance is really a specialty of ours that not a lot of other production firms really specialize in. But it's really any sort of like, I like to say it's kind of two buckets. So we have copyright and like fair use issues. So can I use this without a license, especially on the nonfiction side, or if you're doing a biopic or a feature film that's based on a true story? Oftentimes you'll want to use assets without permission because it falls within the parameters of fair use. So we do that analysis. We help our clients navigate those waters. And then also on the personal rights side, let's say you're writing a script and it's based on a true story. You don't have the rights from those individuals. Can you tell the story and is it okay? And I want to add some fictionalization. Is that okay? And we really navigate those waters. We review the script, we go through it, we talk about what's fictionalized in here, what's real. Would anyone have a viable legal claim for any of their personal rights, which are like your right of privacy, defamation, false light, things that sort of invade your personal I was going to say personal space. That's not your personal space, but that would violate your rights as an individual. And right of publicity, which comes into play as well. So we really look at all those clearance issues to make sure that when you're shooting this or when it goes out in the public, that people can always get upset about things, but they wouldn't have a viable legal claim. That somebody sent a letter, we would have a really good legal basis for supporting the decision to do something without someone's permission.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a lot more than I even thought.
Yeah, it's a lot. So, and I feel like our practice is pretty broad. There's other attorneys who represent talent and they negotiate talent agreements, and they represent actors, they represent writers and producers and directors, and they negotiate that deal. Our job as a production lawyer, that would be like one of the deals, we'd be negotiating on the full film. So our job is it's not similar to a producer, but we really work hand in hand with the producer to kind of get the job done. I think our viewpoint has to be more collaborative. Like, how do we get this finished? It's not like, how do we get the best deal or the most money or the best whatever. Right. We are there to collaborate with the producer to get project to the finish line, no matter what that takes. We're like, okay, let's give on this point. Let's not give on this point. Just juggle all those balls and make sure that everything makes sense at the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. Hearing all that, probably the first question that like a lot of newer filmmakers and producers have come to mind is like, at what point in my career do I actually need to like start working with you guys? And at what point is it still just so little and so independent that nobody's gonna care, know, what I'm doing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I feel like sometimes or maybe all the time, it's sort of like, I think the person knows, all of a sudden you have a project and there's a production company that's interested in it and they send you an agreement and it's a shopping agreement or it's an option or it's something in co-production agreement and you don't really know what to do with it. You're like, oh, I guess I need a lawyer now. It's like, okay, I guess this is a good time to hire a lawyer. I have this agreement in front of me and I don't really understand it. Or if you're creating something independently, and maybe you have the script and you were able to cobble together some sort of right, that you had the rights to it, and then you're talking to potential financiers and someone's really interested in financing it. And they're like, want to write you a check. And you're like, who do they write the check to? What are the terms of the agreement? Like those kind of things that probably would pop up into the person's mind. It's like, oh, I think I need a lawyer. Because that's what we would help you with. So we would create your corporate entity, get you established as a business, put together your financing documents. And so, because you do want to look like a legitimate business when you're going to raise money. Right. But I do feel like there is a time when you kind of know, like, all right, this project, there's really legs to it. It might actually happen. I'm starting to get confronted with agreements, or I want to put together agreements with people. And I think I need a lawyer now. We have a book that I'll plug, Clearance and Copyright, and it's actually really great for first-timers or early stages filmmakers because we have all of these forms in there. So if you do want to do some sort of co-production agreement or a shopping agreement or a simple option, we have those forms so you can put those together. Like, I think some people think a legal document has to be complicated or really long. It really doesn't. Like, I just think it's so important for filmmakers at the beginning stages, even if they don't do something formal, that they do have the agreement memorialized in writing. And that agreement can just be like, me and you are writing this together. We're going to share credit. I'm going to get my credit in first position. You're going to get in second. And we're going to split the fee 50-50. And if you want to drop off the project, I'll pay you 20, will continue to pay you 20% of what comes in or whatever, just very simple deal points so that if things do move forward or if they don't move forward, there's no confusion.
Right.
See that too often. People have to backtrack and like, well, I own the script and well, I own the script and he didn't do anything and I wrote everything. And, so it's just nice to have basic deal points just set forth, even if it's an email, so that later you guys can go back to that and say, like, this is our agreement. And that is binding.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I have clearance and copyright on my bookshelf. It's definitely probably the book I reference the most in my work, and it's full of highlights and all that. So I was kind of excited when this all worked out. It's like, oh, it's people that wrote that book that I'm getting to talk to.
I love hearing when people really use it and they're highlighting it and just because that's what it's for. It's like a tool to use. Like you don't have to read it from front to back, but an issue comes up, like a fair use issue comes up, or I'm hiring a composer. What do I do? And you can just flip to that chapter and we have some really practical tips and there's a form agreement there. And it's really meant to help. So you don't have to hire a lawyer, and then you hire a lawyer on your bigger project, but you're setting yourself up for success with those simple forms that we have in the book.
All right. Just since we're on the book, like I'd be curious, like how did you guys come up with that idea initially of like actually like writing this book?
Well, I'll give all the credit to my partner, Michael.
Okay.
He wrote, because we're on the 5th edition now, he wrote the first edition, I don't know, maybe 30 years ago, before my time with him, maybe 25 years ago, something like that. But his whole reason for writing it was that he just didn't want to answer the same questions over and over and over again. And so I love the story because he basically says like I think he maybe rented a cabin somewhere and he sat on the porch and he may have even hand wrote it at the time, but he either typed it or he hand wrote it, and he was envisioning him talking to one of his clients and just kind of going through the process. And that's sort of where, and that's really his style, and really the whole firm style is to be really approachable, not make things too complicated. It can be fun, it can be interesting. And so that was the first edition, just basically wrote out like all the things you need to know. And it was like 120 pages, I think. And he was fortunate enough to find a publisher. And since then it's grown and grown, and it's used in film schools. Lawyers have it on their desks. And so we've buttoned it up a little bit. So it's a little more formal. We have some cases. And I think I don't know if you've ever used it. One of the cool things is that when we talk about, especially in like the fair use area, we actually have links to the actual clips that were disputed, which I think is really helpful for people to actually see, like, hey, what was found to be fair use, what wasn't fair use.
Yeah.
Actually see that stuff. So the idea was his, and then we try to update it every several years to keep it current. And we're proud of it.
Yeah, it's definitely, I've recommended it to people, and I've referenced it quite a bit, so it's been helpful to me.
That's awesome.
Probably like the next question I would say filmmakers have once they know, like, okay, I need to work with an entertainment lawyer, is like, what should I budget for
That's
this?
a great question.
So like, what's the best way to kind of find out, even like, okay, this would be a good ballpark number for me to put into our budget?
Yeah. Well, it depends. So I think that one easy number I can give you is if you're doing a production, and we're coming on for production legal. So that would be like all of the agreements. It can be some limited clearance work, but all the agreements related to the production of the film, not distribution or financing. We usually charge somewhere between like 1.5% to 2.5% of the budget.
Okay.
And there's like a floor of about 25 grand. Then that can go up. And if you're doing like a $20 million film or a $30 million film, that percentage might go down. But if we're doing sort of a micro budget, $1 million film or a $2 million film, the minimum will probably be 25 grand. And sometimes it's a little more. It'll really depend. A lot of these independent films are actually really time intensive for the lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
It's like an ensemble cast and there's 7 people and you have a couple of A-list stars and a couple of B-list stars. And it's like those negotiations can take forever. So we'll ask you some questions about it, like how many leads are there? Do you anticipate, or, is it SAG? Are you going to be giving back end? Like we kind of try to anticipate what the needs are going to be. How many locations are you shooting at? That type of stuff.
Right.
Is it a writer director? Do we have chain of title issues? So we'll talk about all this stuff, but that's a good approximate is like 1.5% to 2%, 2.5% of your budget.
Okay.
And then for other work, if it's development, if it's financing, if it's distribution, we typically just charge on an hourly basis.
Okay.
And so that really varies. It kind of depends on how complicated things are. And then sometimes on distribution, we'll actually do a percentage of the deal. So we'll take like 2.5%. Usually it's like the lawyer will take like 2.5% to 5% of the
Mm-hmm.
deal. Again, depending if you have a sales agent or there are other people who are taking fees, everything's sort of negotiable and it really depends on what the factual circumstances are, but
Right.
that may be done on a percentage basis.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, that's super helpful.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't have to be. I feel like, especially, I think entertainment lawyers and production lawyers in particular, if we're talking to producers, are pretty approachable.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think this information, I love sharing this information because I don't want it to be a mystery,
Yeah, for sure. Another kind of question I had, especially with you guys focusing on the independent side, is like, how does maybe the type of film, whether it's a feature or a documentary or, short, whatever, maybe vary like what type of legal help you
Mm-hmm.
might need or what extra things you might have to worry about?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I think it really boils down to not so much the format, but the actual content. So
Okay.
I would say the trickiest projects we work on are true crime. And then if it's a narrative, so it's a scripted project based on a true story, and the narrative has some fictionalization in it, those are usually the trickiest from a clearance point of view. So that's when we say, okay, we're going to spend most of our time on clearance here and making sure
Hmm.
that it's okay, the fictionalization's okay, that the facts are portrayed accurately, that, again, no one would have a viable legal claim. We could get you it. Those are kind of our markers. Like, all right, would anyone have a real legal claim, a viable one? Once this is released, and can we get you insurance? Like getting insurance is sort of like the holy grail. Like if we can get you insurance, we're feeling good
Hmm.
about the project because you're going to make financiers comfortable, you make distributors comfortable. You have like that. It's called E&O insurance, errors and omissions insurance, which provides coverage for copyright claims, personal rights claims, trademark claims. So all of those kind of clearance issues that we're looking at, that's the insurance you need to get. So we're really always looking at that end goal of like, can we get you insurance? Can we make distributors and financiers comfortable? And are we comfortable that if somebody writes a letter, we have a really solid legal basis to
Hmm.
support our decision? So if it's like a true crime project, we're spending most of our time like on personal rights issues. Then if it's a doc project and it's like about the history of motion pictures through time, like that's going to be really clip heavy. They're going to do like tons of clips from lots of different movies. And so it's going to be, the personal rights won't be so intense because, we're talking about movies and hopefully, we're just sort of a look back at the history of
Right.
cinema. But that'll be a really intense fair use review because there's going to be probably, 2,000 clips on the log. So that's when we'll be spending our time there. And then narrative projects, like if it's just a straightforward scripted film, then
Hmm.
really our time is really focused on the above the line deals. Those are really the deals that are most time consuming. And probably, the most important. I don't know. I think they're the most important, probably the most important and kind of like making sure that they all fit together. It's always kind of like a puzzle, in terms of compensation. Do we have enough to pay out? If we pay this person more, do we have to pay other people more? And do we have that in the budget? And if we give more back end, like, can we do that? And does it mess up the ecosystem of sort of the financial arrangements of the whole film?
Right.
So yes, I think if we were doing scripted, we're dealing with talent agreements, which really are taking up the bulk of our time as opposed to more a clearance issue.
Hmm.
Yeah.
On the clearance side there, like how long of a process does that generally take? And like, at what point in, say, the script writing process, when is a script good enough that it's worth going through that
Mhm.
clearance process?
Yeah, I mean the length of time really depends. Like we have our timeline in our office where it's like once somebody retains us, we want to give you our notes, our initial notes back within 2 weeks. So that's sort of our to get you in the queue and get the
Hmm.
notes together. It's usually with myself and or a partner and an associate, and we're working on it together. So to get you our notes, we want to take 2 weeks. But then after that, it really depends. Sometimes people go back to the drawing board and they start they're like, actually, we're rewriting this whole thing, and they don't come back to us for 6 months. And so sometimes it can be really long. Like sometimes I'll get an email from someone and they'll be like, "Hey," it's like on a document, they're like, "I have a new cut to send you," and I'll look back and I'll be like, "Oh my god, I haven't heard from this person for 9 months." So sometimes that happens. Sometimes, we'll get a project, let's say today, and then they end up getting into Sundance in January. And so
Hmm.
we have a much shorter window. We got to get the clearance done and the insurance by January. So we have a
Right.
shorter window. I think the shortest it's ever taken is probably like a month or so, but
Okay.
it really can spread out, and it's especially on the nonfiction front where
Mm.
filming is a little bit slower. They're not under it's not the same kind of schedule where you're like doing production for 6 weeks or 12 weeks or 14 weeks and then going into post and you have a very specific post. It's like they're like, oh, something's happening in 3 weeks, so we're going to wait 3 weeks and go shoot this, or oh, we don't have our editor right now, the editor comes back in 6 months. So there's so many time frames there, but we try to be responsive to people's production schedules so that we're keeping
Hmm.
so they're not waiting for us, that things are continuing to move as their production schedule is kind of requiring.
Yeah.
So anyways, it's a horrible answer, but it can take a very short amount of time or it can take a very long time. We've been working on some films for 3 or 4 years. Like
Wow.
it can be a long time. And then I'd say, when is it worth it? I guess this is what I would say again, like the filmmaker usually knows, and sometimes they want to put it out to the world. Like sometimes you might say, I'm just going to put this up on YouTube.
Hmm.
Maybe it's a documentary project you want to put up on YouTube, but you have a bunch of clips you haven't cleared, and so you might want that peace of mind of saying, do these really fall within the parameters of fair use? Can I use these in this way? Or if you're submitting to festivals. But I think I feel like most of our clients come to us at the right time. I do think we work on a fair share of things that maybe never see the light of day, but it's entertainment. Not everything sticks.
Hmm.
But you don't want to wait too late, because if it's too late, and we've had projects come in and they're like, "Hey, well, we're premiering in 2 weeks, so let's clear it." And it's like we may or may not be able to do this. That's not common that we see a project and we're totally fine with it and can just sign off.
Right. One area I did want to like kind of hear your thoughts on is the whole AI thing and kind of
Hmm.
what you guys are seeing on more the legal side. Because I feel like
Yeah,
most of what's making the news and the kind of creative space is all about like, oh, are people going to lose their jobs and
right.
that? It's not really what are the legal concerns that, filmmakers implementing this might
Yeah,
need to
yeah.
worry about.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's definitely an interesting area. It's something that we've been confronted with. It was like, it was kind of creeping up a little bit, and then I think in the last couple months, just like the AI questions just skyrocketed. But
Hmm.
I think the main issues that come into play in our practice are copyright issues. Can I? And a lot of it is depends on a lot of it is related to the training models that are used. Like, does this platform use materials that are licensed? Are they unlicensed? Can we use the output that's created? So from a copyright perspective, that issue comes up a lot, and also the Copyright Office. So I don't want to get too complicated, but the Copyright Office has issued, I don't know if we want to call it a statement or a policy, but they basically said that AI creations are not copyrightable. So you can't
Okay.
protect something that's created by AI. So let's say you have a script that's written by AI, you put in a prompt, write a romantic
Hmm.
comedy, blah, 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 ChatGPT spits out a script. You do not own that copyright. So anyone can take that and anyone can be like, oh, what a cool little script, and they can make their own film out of it. So there's no copyright protection in what's created by the AI software.
Hmm.
Um, courts have not yet ruled on that. And that's sort of like something that's happening. There's lots of cases brewing about, can these AI models use materials without permission to train their software? And that's a question has not yet been answered. So we don't know the legality of that, of the kind of the training portion of it.
Right.
And the other thing that comes across our desk a lot are personal rights issues. So especially like on the nonfiction front, one of the things that's interesting is like, if I can do a biopic about Frank Sinatra, who's just using archival footage and his music and, people talking about him, can I also do something where I create a kind of a deep fake or create his image and put him in it or have his voice narrate it? Can I do that? And our viewpoint really is yes, but we can't create. I think the biggest issue and the lens I always look at this through is deception, and really sort of more an ethical guideline than necessarily a strict legal one. But we don't want to deceive people into thinking this is actually Frank Sinatra talking, or this is actually Frank Sinatra. This is actually footage he appeared in. That the content creator has an obligation to be really clear that this was created using AI and this is not the real thing. So that's always my lens, is like, okay, is this ethical? Will people be deceived by the use of this technology, or will they not be deceived? And I think if they're not being deceived, you're probably in a pretty safe space legally.
Okay.
It's a broad statement, but I think it pans out. At least right now it pans out.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I like the questions you were posing there. Like, that's something I feel like any filmmaker should be able to ask and kind of answer on their own if they're
the whole intent is that I want people to think that this is like never seen before Frank Sinatra footage. Just like, no, that's violations of that's not okay. Whether it's an actual legal violation, I don't know yet, but I would never tell a client like, you can do that. I would say, you need to clearly disclose this is something you've created.
Right. So then, because you were talking there how like right now the Copyright Office, says AI created things aren't copyrightable. So does that mean like essentially, like in your example there of like a Frank Sinatra film, that like part of that film then would be able to be copyrighted?
Yeah, so that's actually a really interesting kind of nerdy lawyer question, but something that we're actually tackling that right now, or grappling with that right now, because we have a client who's created a film where the script was written by AI. And then they have so it's sort of like a hybrid scripted documentary. But they have real documentary subjects kind of exploring the issues of AI and other sort of esoteric issues. And those are real interviews. But again, the script is AI. And then there's some other AI elements in it. And so when we registered the film with the Copyright Office, we just disclosed that certain elements were created through AI. And what our guess is that the Copyright Office will provide copyright protection for most of the film and not for those aspects, which honestly is similar to like if you create a documentary, or if you create a documentary and use a bunch of archival footage you don't own, it's sort of the same thing on the application to the Copyright Office. You would have to disclose like, yes, not everything's original. I don't own any of this stuff. And you have protection in your expressive work, what you've created, and not the archival that's owned by somebody else.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So still kind of weird to think about, but
it's so weird. I know, but it's not created by a human. So I do think that there's got to be some sort of guidelines, because sometimes those inputs are really there is a lot of creativity and a lot of work that's put into what the input is, and so tinkering with that and really creating something. Copyright has very low standards of what's copyrightable. It's basically something that has a modicum amount of creativity and is original. And so if somebody's playing with inputs and it's taking hours or days or months to put in a perfect input to get exactly what they want, it does feel like there should be some protection in that. And maybe the protection is just in the input. Maybe it's just in whatever they typed in. But I do think that there will be some I don't know, if it be discretion or just some sort of leeway in that. I don't think it's going to remain a black and white rule of like anything created by AI is not copyrightable.
Mm-hmm.
We'll
No.
see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this all shakes out. For
Absolutely.
sure.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time.
So then, in some ways, I'm sure this kind of can tie into AI, but I'm sure there's plenty of other things that you see. But like, what are some common misunderstandings you see producers and filmmakers have about the legal side of in the entertainment sphere?
I guess, it's one of the things that I touched on earlier, which is this, that how unapproachable maybe legal services are, or that lawyers
Hmm.
are, that you just don't need it. I also think that it is an issue of people thinking they should wait till later to save money. And so often that's exactly the wrong thing to do, because it often costs the client more money for us to backtrack and sort of
Hmm.
redo things or put things in the right order, or get the right documents in place. That way, if we were just doing it along the way, it would have been a lot easier. It's like stopping at the bank on your way to the office. Like, it's not even an issue. You just stop and you go, as opposed to like making a list of like, okay, I got to go to the bank, and then you got to go to the bank at some time where it's not convenient, and then you got to go there, and it takes more time. You're like, I should have just
Yeah.
stopped in the office. It's a weird analogy that just came to mind, but it's just one of those things that if you're doing it along the way, it's
Hmm.
much less of an issue than if you're trying to do a bunch of things at the end of the process.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And along with that aspect of like doing stuff along the way, what should filmmakers expect in terms of like kind of the turnaround time for stuff? Because I know like in this industry, sometimes there's like, we need this, tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
or and some of that. So like, is there like a kind of, okay, we have to have so much time to, get you what you need, or is it,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, we try to be, I feel like we have to be reactionary to a certain degree, because it really depends on the client's needs. Like, we always love to have as
Hmm.
much time as possible, but like, I mean, a good example is, clients in pre-production on a narrative film, and they are moving forward, and they want to put offers out to talent. And we can't, and the offers are sort of closing, and then we turn long forms, and we can't get a response from the talent lawyer because production's not imminent, right? Like, let's say production's not starting for 2 months. So the talent lawyer is saying, well, I got all these other things to do, things that are starting tomorrow. So I'm
Yeah.
not paying attention to that. So we try, but then really no one's going to pay attention to it until it becomes urgent anyway, because then it gets to the top of that person's list.
Hmm.
But as production lawyers, I feel like we really try to be responsive to the production schedule and production exigencies, and what's happening. And if it's not, then we will take a little bit longer, because just like other people's plates, if somebody's leaving on a shoot tomorrow and they need an agreement finalized, like, we need to get that done. Or if they're, starting production in a week and they don't have all the financing in place and we're closing financing deals, like, that's going to take priority over someone else who's negotiating an option that has no
Hmm.
real timeline on it except for their own personal thing where they want to get started.
Right.
So I think we're pretty good at prioritizing and really recognizing when there's a production emergency or production something that has to happen really quickly, and accommodating that.
Hmm.
And then and then other things will take a little bit longer. So no, it's just, I don't know, it's probably every lawyer's feel, but it's fear. But it's like, I just don't want something to fall through because we weren't timely. It's like, oh
Hmm.
God, like, I don't want to be in that situation. So
Right.
try to be as responsive as possible. And I think, as just being in the space for so long, like, we kind of understand that. And sometimes clients will be like, I need this tomorrow. I need this tomorrow. And I'll know what's happening. So I'll try to calm them down to be like, listen, you really don't need tomorrow. I can't, I'm not gonna get it tomorrow. We'll get it to you in 2 days. I can let this person know that it's not coming for 2 days, like, whatever it
Hmm.
is. But sometimes we do have to do that kind of work too, so that we can manage, because we get busy. We're working on hundreds of clients at one time. Like, we have a lot of small clients. And so we want everyone to feel really taken care of, but sometimes we have to make decisions to say, like, hey, this is
Right.
more important than this other thing.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Another question I've been kind of wondering, because like one of the things you hear a lot of producers talk about is like if they're maybe considering, like working with a new distributor, they'll go ask around to people they know who have worked with them, find out kind of
Mhm.
like what that experience is like. So for producers looking to find an entertainment attorney, like what questions should they maybe be asking to figure out like, are they going to be a right fit
Mhm.
for me and my production and things like that?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. And I think, one of the things I think my most important is well, I don't know, these are equally important. First thing is really a vibe check.
Mhm.
It's like a doctor, doctors and lawyers and any sort of professional, we all have very different personalities. My personality is not for everyone. Like I am not cutthroat. Let's get the best deal we possibly can. Let's just grind this negotiation. Let's make this last as long as possible and get you the best deal possible and just exhaust everybody who's there. There
Mhm.
are some lawyers that are like that. They will fight tooth and nail for every single thing. And that's not wrong. And that might really appeal to somebody, to a producer's personality or to talent's personality. And for me, like I'm always like, how do we get to the finish line and what can we give on to get there? How can we make the other party feel good about this too? Like, I love that saying that a good negotiation is where everyone feels a little bit defeated. Like everyone is like, okay, I gave on a little bit, I got a little bit, but no one's like the winner and the loser.
Yeah.
And so I'm always that's kind of my viewpoint of like, hey, what can we give on? Like what hurt this production? What can we do? What can we give on that still will make this a doable project?
Mhm.
And what can't we? And let's dig our heels on that and let's have a real reason why. But again, like sometimes people are like, you're not being aggressive enough for me. Like I want you to fight tooth and nail for this. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm not necessarily the right person to do that. Like that's not necessarily my style. So I think all lawyers have different styles. And so I think that's one thing to really make sure that there's a good relationship, that you like your lawyer, you like their style, you like how they negotiate things. And you feel comfortable with that tactic or with that approach.
Right.
And then the other thing is really making sure that they're in the right area. It's like I think us as production attorneys, we cast a pretty wide net on the types of legal work that we do. But if you like came to me and you were like, I have this really I have this employment issue where this person's, maybe it's on a movie set, but someone's filing a claim for sexual harassment. Um, I'm not the person to do that. I shouldn't be. And sometimes people are like, well, can't you just handle it? Like, you're our lawyer. We like you. Just do it. And I'm like, sometimes I reluctantly say, okay, and I always regret it. But, you really want someone who understands your area of law. So even like if you're a narrative filmmaker versus a documentary filmmaker, like you want someone who has experience in that area.
Mhm.
So kind of asking what projects they've worked on. I mean, now we all have websites, so you can kind of see their representative clients and what types of projects. You can pretty much do your own research on that. But so I think those two things of like one, making sure it's the right lawyer, like you're not going to hire a talent attorney to represent a production, you're not going to hire a labor attorney to represent, an actor, like whatever it is, make sure it's the right area and to make sure that you like their personality and you like how they work.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Does like the area of like the country that you're located in, does that play any into maybe
You
whether
know,
you hire or
not
not
so
really?
much in like as in the United States, we're barred in our state only. Like, so I'm only licensed to practice law in California. Some people obviously are licensed to practice in more than one state, but for me, I'm licensed to practice law in California. We do represent clients in other states, and it's
Hmm.
usually not a problem, especially in entertainment. It becomes more of an issue when you're in litigation. Like if you have a litigator who's licensed in California, they can't appear for you in court in New York. But if you're doing transactional work, it's a little less important. I just couldn't advise you on like Iowa law. I can
Right.
say this is the way, there might be something I'll research something and I'll say this is what we think, but under our ethical guidelines, we're not supposed to advise people on the laws of other states. But that being said, typically we'll try to keep our agreements subject to California law, even if our clients are out of state, because just because California law has the most next to New York robust case law
Hmm.
on entertainment matters. Um, and then if they wanted subject to Iowa law or another state, we can do that, but we wouldn't be the ones advising, say, yes, this is a great idea. So we do have clients. We have clients all over the country. We have some clients that are not even in the country that are international.
Okay.
Uh, and so so yeah, so it's typically not a problem, but I do like to just make that caveat just because that's our ethical responsibility to do so.
Right. So then I got kind of two final wrap-up questions here for you. The first one is just like, what would be one piece of advice you would give to a filmmaker who's getting ready to work with an entertainment lawyer for the first time?
I would say, I guess, transparency is really important. Transparency and communication, and just not be like, it's such a relationship issue. It's like we have clients, like sometimes a client will send me something and then I'll be really busy and I won't hear from them for 3 weeks. And maybe and again, this doesn't happen a lot. I don't want to say I'm irresponsible, but like, someone doesn't get back to me and then it gets slipped through the cracks, and then it's like 4 weeks later, I'm like, oh my God, I never did this. It's been great to have like a little follow-up,
Hmm.
don't be afraid to communicate with your lawyer. I think sometimes clients are like, oh, I'm gonna get charged for this, or I shouldn't talk to them, but you don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish. Like, you should be thorough, you should be complete, and really just have that open dialogue. Like, don't sometimes people be like, oh, I put together this agreement, can you look it over for me? And I'm like, it would have been a lot more efficient if I would have just started from my form that I'm already familiar with and been able to plug in your variables here. So have that conversation first before you go through the work of like creating a document online and cobbling a bunch of provisions together. You might actually save money just by your lawyer doing it. So I think the bottom line is just that communication is just
Hmm.
to be open and have a good communication line with your lawyer, and feel comfortable talking with them about what your needs are.
No, that's good to know. And talking to lawyers sounds scary
Yeah, it
to
sounds totally
me.
scary. And also, sometimes it's overkill. Sometimes like, hey, stop calling. Like, you don't have to call me every day or whatever. Like, we don't even talk about this, but I think initially, like,
Mhm.
sort of setting it up. And also, I think with the idea of having a long-term relationship, like, I think I'm the best advocate for those clients who I really know. There's certain
Right.
producers and production companies that we've been representing for years. And those people, like, I know what they want. Like, I know what they want. We have a shorthand. I can negotiate on their behalf. Like, I know what's important, what's not important to them. We can pick up the phone and get to the finish line quickly. But that took a long time to get there. So I think you want to go into your entertainment. Like, a lot of people look for entertainment lawyers and they look for the cheapest lawyer. They're like, well, someone else was cheaper. And it's like, well, then go with that person. But I think if you really plan on having a career in the entertainment industry, it's just really helpful to have a lawyer who's by your side and understands what your ethos is and what's important to you. And, it's just a nice person to have on your team, to have
Hmm.
a lawyer who's really part of your team, who really understands your business and, again, what's important to you.
For sure. So yeah, then my final question for you is just if people are interested in connecting with your firm for help on their next project or maybe interested in checking out clearance and copyright, like where can they go to connect and find you?
Well, we're pretty easy to find. So Clearance and Copyright's available on Amazon, so you can just get it there. And in terms of connecting with us, we have a website. I think all of our email addresses are on our website. Um, and yeah, email is typically the best way to reach out to us, but obviously you can call us or email us and someone will get back to you.
We'll go ahead and wrap up this episode of the Producer Podcast, but thank you again, Lisa, very much for taking the time to come on today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
And with that, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Producer Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, then make sure to pick up a copy of Clearance and Copyright, co-authored by Lisa. It's a must read for any filmmaker or producer out there. Until next time, make sure to subscribe to the Producer Podcast, and thanks for listening.